DJ Easy Dick. Remember that?
No.
You don't remember that?
No.
Is that too West Coast for you? Like you refuse to
Maybe.
listen to Snoop Dogg? Is that
No,
how
I
deep
love
that your hatred went?
Snoop is great. Snoop is great.
So are you saying that when Tupac came out with Hit 'Em Up, you were like, that's it, I'm done with all West Coast hip hop, and you just threw away your Far Side tapes?
No.
That's what this
Hit 'Em
show
Up
should
was
be
a
about.
really good song.
What is a good song?
Hit 'Em Up.
Ooh, you better watch what you say. All of New York is going to be mad at you.
Everyone knows that.
Good morning to most, good afternoon to others, and good evening to the viewing audience across the pond. I'm Jason Miles, your host for another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you're new to the channel, please like, subscribe, and if you're enjoying what you see, make sure you hit the notifications bell as we're constantly adding new episodes and doing cross streams with other channels like our bi-monthly news show, Revolutionary Reckoning, with David and Matt of Left Reckoning. We will not be doing that this coming week since of the holiday. So we will be re-airing, an older episode that I did with the late Mike Davis. It was back when we had totally different audio and live stream guests. Those newer to this program may not be aware that we are an audio podcast as well. Actually, this show started out as an audio show, but alas, things change. Our show is always available on audio podcast. If you go back in the archives, you'll find that the audio only shows were different guests than the live streams. Thank you, Pascal, for convincing me I was doing too much. So if you enjoy the show and miss the live stream, or if you like to listen to podcasts and your grueling mega commutes, then subscribe to This is Revolution everywhere you get your podcasts. Also, we have to talk about the merchandise. If you enjoy what we do here at TIR and don't want to make the monthly patron commitment, then you can show your support with revolutionary merch. MT, can you bring up the merch on the screen, please? Is it on the screen?
Yeah.
You're supposed to talk about it. How wonderful.
I'm supposed to talk about it?
Yeah.
I thought you okay.
I have the teleprompter up. I can't do both at the same time. You bring it up, and then you in your lovely melodious voice are supposed to talk about how awesome it is to get Pascal's smiling face on a mug, t-shirt, mouse pad.
Also, I have to pimp the merch. If you enjoy what we do here and TIR,
you got to have your own line. You got to have it super New York, like you got to be like a New York dude selling bootleg dresses at the beauty shop.
My gosh. In a
like
parking
Tyrese,
lot.
like Tyrese and Baby Boy. That's what you got to do right now, but the East Coast version of Tyrese and Baby Boy.
if you don't want to make the monthly Patreon commitments, you can show your support with revolutionary merch. Show merch.
I'm so mad at you for reading the directions.
Yeah.
You're like an actor where they're like, and smile intently.
Well, you can let your coworkers know where you stand with this revolution mug.
You made that up on your own. That's you.
I
That's
did.
Look, Pascal will not be joining us today, but that's okay because I believe, and this isn't a replacement. This is just another member of the team.
Wait.
What? Yes.
So, sorry. I'm sorry. Can we show the cartoon
of the host?
Yes.
Before we bring him in?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, you do it. Hey, you are the super producer of the show, MT Tucson, with the melodious voice. Yes.
All right. Here's a picture. Who's the artist?
I don't know. I don't know who the artist is. At first, I thought it was the captain and Cuba as Gilligan.
Mm.
And then you were the one that told me that it was Tintin, and I was like, "Oh, that is totally Tintin."
Yeah,
and they made Pascal have the blue shirt. And there's a Haitian thing in there too, right?
The symbol that's on the Haitian flag is on Pascal's hat.
I mean, I thought it was awesome. That is the one. Whoever drew that, what should we do? Can we give them something?
Yeah, we have to.
Okay, whoever drew this, can you message me? Booking at This Is Revolution Podcast, and or Twitter, This Is Revolution. What is our Twitter again? At TIR Show Oakland. And we will send you. What can we send them?
Something.
We'll send you something.
Yeah. Kuba's cuter than that.
Is he? That's an adorable picture.
It is an adorable picture.
It is an adorable picture. It's like Kuba with the post haircut hair. Because there's different phases of Kuba. You get Kuba when he's working from home and doesn't have to do Zoom meetings and the beard grows out. You get Kuba, right before the wedding when he's got to shave his face and look like a grown 12-year-old. There's so many different phases of Kuba that you get. Let's not talk about the 50 Shades of Kuba. Let's bring in everyone's favorite middle manager of the Death Star. He is my good friend. He's moving up in the batting order today. And he's got a glorious view of downtown Coruscant. Deep State Kuba.
Oh, hello.
That was a lengthy conversation you had about me without me. Interesting.
I don't know who drew the picture, Kuba. Do you know?
Yes, the picture came out of the Kuba Deep State room on our Discord, and a user named Manrickson produced both of them. So,
okay,
I pinged them on the channel there, so they know to reach out.
We have to give them something. That's really dope. So they say what they want on the website, and we'll send it to them.
But I feel like it would only be fair to get some merch in the hands of the first artist too, because the Tintin that was a bit of a bespoke project for MT. But the picture that I use in my Twitter background, that also came out of that channel. And frankly, I want to encourage as much Deep State Cuba fan art as possible. Let 1,000 flowers bloom.
I approve.
Mrs. Deep State just said that she approves. That is adorable. Can you give Mrs. Deep State a nod and a hello from me and a virtual hug? I would actually virtual hug Mrs. Deep State.
Summer, they're calling you Mrs. Deep State.
No.
That's the only thing I'm going to communicate.
He's snitching on us.
They said, Jason, sending you a virtual hug.
Oh.
Yeah. She came over immediately at Mrs. Deep State. Like, it was full blown glare. Right? You think that's powerful sunlight out there, but the glare in here will give you a tan.
That's all I need. Someone yelling at us in 8 different languages.
Yep.
Filmed before a live studio audience.
Also, I want to say that there will be a big announcement coming from the TIR and a few other channels. Monday. We'll have a big announcement. I can't say yet what it is. I'm excited for the announcement. It definitely involves the people that you hear and even some that you're hearing. So Monday, stay tuned for big.
I want to be intro too.
Cut you off. Okay. And how can we forget the woman that makes all of this happen? She is the headless, faceless voice of reason. She is the M. Tucson.
Hello. Jason, good to see you. Don't gender me. Kuva, thanks for wearing the see-through shirt on Saturday. We like it.
Is he nipped out?
A little bit.
Is it cold? Is it cold in his apartment?
Please tell me it's cold.
Yeah, Kuva has no central heat.
You know, you got to keep it old country.
And that's
Kuva
saying a lot. You don't wear pants either, so maybe he's got long johns. He's got a shirt tie and a long johns on.
Long johns? Aren't Canadians born with long johns on?
Damn.
Are you body hair shaming?
I would never.
Oh God, we are so mean today. Let's get serious. I actually found a serious thing to talk about, but yeah, Pascal won't be joining us. He's taking a very well-deserved break. So could you guys please wish the brother well on his day of rest? Send him a shout out on Twitter or Facebook. Thank you guys, first of all, for tuning in today. I'm sure y'all are ready to dive right into the topic of thinking beyond capitalism. I'm excited, as is the TIR crew, to talk with the brilliant Steve Paxton. But before we bring in Steve, I want to bring to light a recent front page article I read in the LA Times this morning about the persistence of Section 8 housing discrimination, even though there are laws on the books that prevent it. One of the things we're going to discuss today are, of course, property relations, freedom, and bourgeois ideas of equality. From the article in the LA Times. More than 2 years after a law in California made it illegal for landlords to refuse to rent to people who pay through Section 8 and other subsidies, leasing agents routinely reject tenants because of their vouchers or illegally discourage their applications, according to tenant advocates and state officials. The state's Civil Rights Department sponsored testing, revealing that nearly half of properties polled in LA County this year showed signs of, quote, unlawful discrimination against voucher holders. Like the state, the Housing Rights Initiative, a national investigative nonprofit, has sent people to pose as renters in LA and test whether landlords accept Section 8. Los Angeles is a festering hotbed of housing voucher discrimination, said Aaron Carr, the group's executive director. The Section 8 program, named after a section of the Federal Housing Act, is one of the U.S. government's most powerful tools to keep rental housing affordable and fight overcrowding and homelessness. Administered by local agencies, the program was launched in the 1970s by the federal government as an alternative to costly public housing projects, which were criticized for segregating poor families in neighborhoods with low-quality schools and other substandard services. Unlike public housing, the subsidy under Section 8 can move with tenants so that they can find housing with private landlords. But while Section 8 pays rent for 2.3 million households nationwide, tenants have long found it difficult to find landlords who will accept their vouchers. Vouchers often are worth less than rents in middle-income neighborhoods, narrowing options at the outset. With rentals that are in the right price range, the paperwork, inspections, and delays it can take to rent to Section 8 tenants makes some landlords wary. Other landlords believe voucher holders are bad tenants, which advocates say is inaccurate and can reflect negative stereotypes for people, as well as people of color who make up a majority of Section 8 participants. In 2020, amid a long-running affordable housing crisis, California joined a handful of other states when a source of income law took effect, making it illegal to discriminate against tenants who pay with subsidies. Before the state acted, the city of Los Angeles passed a similar ordinance, which also took effect in 2020. Under these laws, landlords are not required to lower the rent to make it affordable to voucher holders or to rent to every Section 8 household that applies. But they can no longer refuse to consider a tenant for having a rental subsidy. Once common rental ads that displayed no Section 8 are now illegal. Implementing different rules for tenants with and without vouchers is also illegal. For example, while landlords can require a certain credit score or deposit, they can't mandate that someone with a voucher meet a higher bar, according to the California Civil Rights Department. Marissa Bowman, a director with People Assisting the Homeless, PATH, said she encounters hesitant property owners on a daily basis when helping homeless people find housing. Among the questionable denials, Bowman said, are times when she has inquired about a landlord's screening criteria on income before saying that the clients have a voucher. After learning about the voucher, some landlords change the threshold they have previously laid out and deny the applicants for having income that is too low. It takes extra work to get around these subtle objections, Bowman said. Studies find that voucher holders secure housing more easily in places with source of income laws, but according to a recent Urban Institute report, that benefit isn't immediate. The think tank study indicates that source of income laws have allowed more voucher holders with children to move into neighborhoods with low property rates, but on average, it took 6 years after a law goes into effect to see an increase. Study co-author Daniel Tellis said that's likely because it takes time to educate landlords and tenants on the law and for governments to take enforcement action. In LA County, lack of compliance appears widespread. In a news release in October, the California Civil Rights Department said 38 of 80 LA County properties tested in 2022, nearly half showed evidence of unlawful discrimination, and the department would bring enforcement actions where appropriate. The testing found that the most common kind of discrimination was outright refusal to accept Section 8 vouchers, followed by properties that offered better terms like lower rent to people without vouchers. According to Chancellor Al Mansour, executive director of the Housing Rights Center, the nonprofit that conducted the testing for the state. Dan Eukelson, executive director of the Apartment Association of Greater LA, said red tape has long discouraged mom and pop landlords from taking Section 8, and many small owners who don't have armies of lawyers and employees simply aren't aware of their new responsibilities. There is a lot of misunderstanding, he said, criticizing the government for doing a poor job of communicating what the law is. Tenant advocates similarly called for more landlord education, but said authorities must increase enforcement as well. Doing so would ensure that more people are housed and that the human and physical costs of homelessness are reduced. The government needs to be instilling the fear of God in real estate, Carr said in an email. Anything short of that is policy failure. Quote. Currently, enforcement differs by location. The state civil rights department investigates violations across California, while local authorities can play a role if those jurisdictions like Los Angeles have their own source of income rules. Anna Ortega, an assistant general manager of Los Angeles Housing Department, said the agency hasn't investigated source of income complaints because it tracks our fair housing services and refers such complaints to the Housing Rights Center. The nonprofit then files lawsuits itself or reports source of income complaints to state and federal authorities. As we constantly discuss inequality, programs like Section 8 were designed to solve that problem. That was created when we had massive housing projects. Does the Section 8 system go far enough, or do we need a better system or better enforcement of the laws that we already have on the books? What say you, Kuba and MT?
I think that this is actually it relates to a part of what we'll be talking about with Steve Paxton, Stephen Paxton, where if you make the government or public services available on the basis of a means test, then you, because it's not going to be used by middle class people, let alone wealthier people, then there tends to be systemic undersupply and all kinds of barriers and quality problems as well. And the stigma of poverty gets attached to the benefit. And you can see this in another form with public transit, especially in places like LA. Everything is geared for someone who owns their own car. If you don't, and you rely on getting around by bus, then it's not supposed to be convenient. It's not supposed to be easy, because it's part of this kind of infrastructure of humiliation at people using public services, even if they're paying for them. And if you're a landlord in the market as well, that stigma gets applied to people with Section 8 housing, right? They're not the tenants you want. If you're looking at it from either through class snobbery or through just a brutal calculation of are they going to be able to consistently provide us with rent money? Are they going to the best tenants are, of course, the ones that have the resources and the time to handle everything themselves, even, and take responsibilities off your plate. And it's the stigma that that makes Section 8 voucher holders seem like bad tenants. In the United States, there's that additional level of kind of moral capitalist judgment that if you're poor, this implies some kind of life or character failure.
Mm-hmm. MT, did you want to add to that?
I think that's all very well said. The stigma is a real problem. I see it all, all kinds of places, no Section 8. Or if I do see Section 8 accepted, it's a really rundown kind of place. It's unfortunate, really.
I mean, there's crazy tax breaks that people can get with Section 8. And some people have been able to really benefit from that. And that's why you get either slumlords on one hand or, like we were talking about in San Francisco, where they're having that whole holdup on building housing, just building housing in general in a city that is in desperate need of just housing.
Yeah.
Before we even talk about, low income, they just need market rate housing in San Francisco.
Yeah, it's a way of policing the class line in a hyper-stratified society. If you have high quality public housing available, then if you look at rents in many European countries, you have to, as a landlord, provide something nice in order to convince people that they shouldn't be just living in what's publicly available. And rents at that point are get controlled by increased demand, while the alternatives, you still have developers and landlords fighting for that premium market.
Yes.
In the United States. But now, if you don't fall there into that bucket of kind of premium tenants, then your alternatives are absolutely meager. And you either have, like you said, slumlords, basically people who specialize at operating the Section 8 incentive and tax credit system rather than providing housing, or this very patchwork access. And the whole housing is a right language, I think, reminds us that there's no reason why everything, including the shelter that people need to survive, it should be generated on a for-profit commodity basis in the market, because that's not looking after people's rights. That's just creating extraction opportunities, literally rents for those that started out with the capital to make the investments.
Well, that's literally kind of the crux of what we're going to be talking about today, and why I thought this story was so interesting. Even if we weren't going to be talking with Steve, I thought it was an important story, and I think more often than not, these situations don't get the coverage, and people don't have kind of a good idea of the history. And when we look at things through the American lens, then we see public housing as somewhat substandard. So let's get into why that may even be. MT, are you ready to bring in the guest?
Sure. I just want to say really quickly,
go ahead.
It's really cool that this topic is resonating with the chat. Housing obviously affects everyone, or lack thereof. Yes, ready to bring in our guest.
As someone who did this show unhoused for longer than people think. In addition to an academic career culminating in doctoral research with GA Cohen at Oxford, Steve Paxton has worked on building sites and in betting shops, been a PHP programmer and a t-shirt designer, been employed, self-employed, and unemployed, blue collar, white collar, and no collar. He combines the experience of this varied career with his academic background to bring unique insights to the printed page from Paxton's upcoming book, How Capitalism Ends. If we want to understand how capitalism ends, then we need to understand what capitalism is and how it arose. We might then be in a position to know whether it's possible to move on, and if so, then how and to what. We also need to understand the nature of historical progress and the ways in which large-scale lasting changes are driven by a dynamic interaction between technological developments and human rationality. This is the process which saw capitalism emerge from the feudal past, and it's the process which will see us move forward away from capitalism into something else. I'll argue that a post-capitalist future which lies broadly within the concept of socialism is both desirable and obtainable. That is a quote from the upcoming book, How Capitalism Ends. Please welcome our guest. Are you ready to bring him in?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Steve Paxton. Steve, what prompted you to want to write this book after you wrote Unlearning Marx? I mean, obviously, you're no stranger to provocative topics.
Well, I guess I think Unlearning Marx is kind of is something I wanted to get out of the way early on, really, before I tackled this subject, because I think so. Part of what I'm aiming at is to try and obviously convince people that socialism would be a good idea. And one of the very first responses to that is 100 million deaths under socialism, communism, Soviet Union. There you go, checkmate. So Unlearning Marx was kind of just a way of kind of just tackling that argument on its own individually. So then this book is more kind of having got that out of my system. This book is more concerned with kind of a broader look. I think Unlearning Marx really was kind of, I mean, a lot of that was stuff that I did in my doctorate many years ago. So it was it's quite an academic-y kind of a book, and it kind of appealed really to people that were already quite immersed in the kind of things that you guys talk about on this podcast and that we all kind of spend our time talking about. And this book really is kind of, while it is, I think there's plenty in it for those people as well, but it's also trying to appeal to a wider audience.
I think it does. I think
what we have to, it's pretty simple. Really. We can't have socialism until there are more socialists.
Oh, no.
So we need to convince people who aren't now socialists that they ought to be socialists. I think and this book is kind of aimed at that. But there is also a problem on the left where lots of socialists spend most of their time berating other people for not already being socialists, or complaining that they're the wrong sort of socialist, or calling them libtards because of some tiny little discrepancy or disagreement about strategy or tactics or analysis or something. And actually what we need to do is we need those people that are not, there are loads of people out there that kind of share our goals, share our aims, broadly agree with us about what constitutes a just society, but kind of think that you can do that within capitalism. And when you start saying to them, I'm trying to say, well, firstly, no, you can't, because the nature of capitalism prevents that. And secondly, actually getting past capitalism isn't that big and scary. I mean, it's big. It's obviously a big task, but it's not impossible, and it's not something that is kind of inevitably going to lead to the gulags. And so this book kind of tries to address that. So the first section, history, looks at how we got here and kind of what capitalism is, and how historical change happens. And then and really that part argues that capitalism has done a job, as Marx said. Capitalism is a really useful way of just making loads more stuff, at a certain level of development, but we've got past that level of development now. Our problem isn't that we haven't got enough stuff. It's just that it's really badly distributed, and it's all the wrong stuff, often the wrong stuff. So there's this kind of, it's practically, we can look at the world and go, look, this isn't working anymore and we need something else. And then the second section is about ideology, because capitalists will argue, even though, okay, you've convinced me that this is a suboptimal system, but it's the only way to deliver freedom, and it's the only way to deliver, property rights. It's the only thing to protect property rights, and it's the only kind of, the market is this kind of final arbiter of everything, and that's there's justice in that. So the ideology section argues against that kind of defense, and then the final section, progress, looks at ways we may be able to progress away from this, and ideas about how we might be able to move forward and what that kind of change might look like. It's not prescriptive. I'm not demanding that we must follow certain policies. I'm kind of saying, look, these are the shapes of things that we need to be thinking about, and these are ways that we need to start moving in that direction, in a way that is not that scary for people that aren't quite yet convinced. The people, though, we need those people on our side. We're not going anywhere while we've got the number of socialists that we've got now. So we need to convince some more people, and we need to bring them on a journey with us. There's a lot of inertia among people in wanting to move, but there's also this massive kind of pressure from right-wing media and the education system and everything else. It kind of bulks up the status quo. So we need to kind of address these things, but we need to bring people with us on a journey.
You put capitalism not in the most negative light in this book. I think you have a pretty honest portrayal of the capitalist system. Why did you want to do that?
I think that's the Marx coming out, really. What I'm saying about capitalism largely, I don't mean in terms of kind of the technicalities of how the economy works, but its role in history and what it's done. I'm kind of agreeing with Marx there that capitalism is, as a system, capitalism is at a certain stage of technological development, capitalism is brilliant at making more stuff, at just increasing productive capacity. Mm-hmm. The system is controlled by individuals who just want to be richer, and the way they get richer is by running successful businesses. And if you want to be rich, capitalists don't care whether you like your car or your phone or whatever. They care whether you're just going to keep buying from them. And a byproduct of that is that they have to make something you like or something that's successful. They're not interested in satisfying human needs. They're interested in making money. But the way to make money is to satisfy human needs better than anyone else. Now, of course, there's huge problems with this, because the only needs they're interested in are the needs of those people who've got the money to pay. They don't care if you're starving, but if you're starving and you've got some money, then they'll be there ready to swap some food for some money to enrich themselves. So there is a way, although there's a terrible human cost of capitalism, there's huge amounts of inequality. It's kind of devastating for the planet. Mm-hmm. It's the whole way historically, not conceptually, but historically, it's kind of been bound up with empire and that kind of thing. It's there's lots wrong with capitalism, but what it has done is it's given us this huge amount of productive capacity. So it provides what Marx calls the material requirements of free human society. We can't be free until we've got enough stuff. There's no point sharing everything out when there isn't enough, because you just piss off everybody, and everybody's disgruntled, and then I don't want to keep quoting Marx, but in his words, all the old filthy business is restored. So if you want a successful transition to socialism, you need this kind of amount of abundance that you can then produce. And actually, socialism potentially could be better at producing more stuff at the level of technology we've now reached. But in fact, it doesn't really matter if it isn't. It doesn't have to be. We don't need more stuff. We've got plenty of stuff. Food, for example, we throw away 28% of the food we produce. We feed loads more of the food we produce to animals, so that people in the West can get McDonald's 3 times a week. And yet 9 million people die of hunger every year. So the problem of all those people dying of hunger is not because we don't have enough food. It's because we can't we have a system that would rather throw the food away than give it to hungry people.
Yeah, and I think that I want to address a couple of things that I saw in the chat related to this. No one is disputing that there's that capitalism is based on the exploitation of labor, but for part of its history, that exploitation and the vast human toll that it led to paid off in creating infrastructure, industrial infrastructure, which then went into that accelerating productive base that produces the mountains of stuff that allows the global standard of living to be above that of subsistence agriculture for the vast majority of the population. It really did transform the material basis of society and everything else with it. And but to tie in with the point that you're making in that first section, a system that might have this kind of demonic payoff where you accept a certain level of human suffering. And you make a great point about unemployment targets, right? There's basically a portion of the population that gets sacrificed to poverty in order to keep the system running. And that sacrifice in the past led to some tangible material, some tangible creative processes, some tangible benefits that accrued historically, not to the people who were being exploited, but at least to others. However, arguably, capitalism has crossed a threshold where it no longer incentivizes through that kind of consumer mechanism that libertarians and that some of the others that you take to task in the second section of your book describe it as the most productive system ever, and instead has begun to eat its own tail. Now, so much innovation is purely speculative. Someone in the chat mentioned NFTs, for instance. There's no benefit to anybody from the construction of this category of not even commodity, because the underlying art exists with or without the NFT. It's just a speculative financial instrument. And that financial aspect is consuming the productive aspect to the point where it's unclear if there's if capitalism can even maintain its own sustainability, let alone provide however uneven net contribution to human development that it did in the past.
Did you want to respond to that, Steve?
Yeah. I think. Sorry, I was just distracted by the chat there. But
They do that. They do that.
Don't do it.
Yeah, I'll cover it up. Yeah, I think the thing is, I mean, I'm not saying look how great capitalism is. I'm not saying that if I'd been there in 1500 with the power to decide how the world was going to accumulate this kind of productive capacity, that I would have said, well, okay, that's fine. Loads of people will die, but let's have capitalism because it will do it quickly. But that's happened. We can't change that fact. It has happened, and it has delivered this productive capacity. And now what we need to do is to realise that it's run its course and it's time to go somewhere else now. And I think one of the arguments in the book really is about whether we, there's the idea that we could reform capitalism maybe, and we could have a better taxation, a more progressive taxation system, and a better welfare safety net and things like that. And obviously we could, and those if we get those that's great. Those are good things. That's not something to be complained about, but that should be part of a progress towards actually removing capitalism as the system that we live under, because firstly, all of those gains are easily lost again, as we've had in Britain. but also it doesn't really fix the underlying problems. It's addressing loads of different symptoms of the problem to do that. And what we need to do is address the actual problem and get rid of capitalism. But I do think saying about kind of like that's an incremental move, and should we be happy to move in that direction through better welfare state and that kind of thing? I think, yeah, definitely. If you look at Britain in the 70s, I mean, we were talking when you were talking, Jason, about Section 8 housing vouchers. Mm-hmm. When I was first unemployed in the UK in the 80s, you got housing benefit, and they just paid the money into your bank account, or you collected it from the post office in cash, and you went and gave it to your landlord, or you went to the pub or whatever. But you know, there was no voucher, there was no. Now I think it's paid straight to the landlord. By the time the last time I was unemployed, I think it was then paid straight to the landlord. That's probably still the case. But just moving back to that situation, that's better. That's not the answer, having cash in your hand instead of a voucher, but it's better than where we are now. And if you make lots of incremental changes that are all better, then that moves us in the right direction. The important thing is not to think that just a load of little changes that don't add up to the end of capitalism is going to be enough, because they're all take backable, which is what we, if we were starting from where Britain was in kind of 1970 with loads of publicly available housing, free university, not just free university education, but being paid to go to university if your parents weren't rich or if you weren't rich. The NHS is a fully functioning, totally publicly owned thing, but also loads of nationalised industries as well. Steel and coal, and we have car manufacturers and travel agents and all kinds of things were publicly owned. So if we could be starting from there, then we would have a lot less far to go. But we do have to go the whole way and get rid of capitalism, because otherwise it's just too vulnerable.
And that reminds me of something that you talk about in your book too, and we talked about it a little bit the other day on the show, was the idea of revolution not always being storming the barricades, but an incremental process that takes sometimes hundreds of years. And in talking about the free universities and the public housing that sounded like it worked for people that were unemployed, which we don't necessarily have here in this country, to repeal that also took time. There was a revolution also against the public goods. Would you say started during the Thatcher era?
Yeah, so I mean, 79 really is the point where we look. I know Pascal has talked sometimes about 68 as being significant in America, but I think here we really look at. We had the post-war Labour government in 1945 set up the NHS and started all of these really good things, and then they had another couple of terms in the 60s where they introduced comprehensive schooling and things like that. But it's 79 with Thatcher. Although she didn't kind of get to work immediately, it was probably the 83 election that really gave them that was really where they started dismantling all those things that have been built since 1945. But that's, and the problem is that, like the Democrats in America, when Labour get in, all they do is kind of, okay, they did make a few things better. They did have some achievements, but mainly they just kind of hold the fort until the Tories get back in again and start us on the downward slope. And I think, there's a bit of a parallel there with the Dems.
And there seems to be this idea that I see it. Revolution is going to be swift and it's going to be violent, but we don't look at that sudden, but we don't look at it like that in the same way when we look at these right-wing counter revolutions, if you will, like how we at Pascal talk about the 50-year counter revolution starting 50 plus year starting in 68 with Nixon and Reagan. Did you want to?
I think.
Did you want to expand on that idea?
Yeah. So I think the.
I'm sorry, because it comes out sounding like reform, and for some reason that's a bad word.
Yeah. So I think one thing I say in the book is that the debate about revolution and reform is usually framed incorrectly. It's usually a debate about means, and it's about should we be, a revolutionary is out on the streets with a Molotov cocktail, and a reformist is kind of writing to their MP and joining a union or whatever. But actually, the question of revolution or reform is actually a question of ends. It's, are we getting rid of capital? Do we think capitalism can be reformed, so that we can have better welfare safety nets and a more progressive taxation system and whatever else? Or do we think we have to get rid of capitalism? And that's the dividing line between revolution and reform. So in that sense, then I'm definitely in favour of revolution, because I think we definitely need to get rid of capitalism and move beyond it, and hopefully that will be into socialism. But in terms of the debate about does it have to be sudden and violent and that kind of thing, I think lots of people think that if you favour more dramatic means, that makes you more of a leftist, and if you don't, then you are somehow less of a leftist. You're less far left. If you come up with some kind of really good, practical but fairly kind of quiet and efficient, is rejected by people because it doesn't sound dramatic enough. And I think part of the issue. So in the first part of the book, I look at the capitalist revolutions that got us to where we are now. So in the French Revolution is an obvious example. So when people talk about the French Revolution, really they're always talking about 1789 and guillotines and that kind of thing, storming the Bastille. But that was really the political world catching up with the economic changes that have been going on for some time. And the same with the English Revolution in the 17th century. We cut a king's head off. We had a civil war that lasted 9 years, I think. But all of those things only really happened because of economic changes that have been going on, that have been slowly kind of developing over a couple of hundred years. And what happened was the bourgeoisie had gained enough actual physical clout because of their economic progress that they were able to win what we call the English Civil War, but it was actually the English Revolution. And not only were they able to win it, but they were able to consolidate it. And it took, even after the Civil War, it was another kind of 50 years before they were really starting to, before they got a constitutional monarch. They got a king that agreed that Parliament had these powers. Powers of the king were limited. And from there, that was kind of the start of the slippery slope for the old order, because their power has gradually been eroded away, and so now the monarchy just don't really have any formal political power. Obviously, they're still really rich, so they've got some economic power, and because of the hangover of their position, they've got kind of the ear of politicians, but they don't. Their position doesn't confer them any kind of formal political role. So I think the point is that those changes were. There are lots of changes. There are lots of people experimenting with ways. Nobody sat around in 1500 and said, right, let's have capitalism. But people did things that. Sorry, the dog's just going on. People did things that made sense to them, that they acted in their own self-interest, and they used innovations in new ways. And the upshot of that was a kind of a snowball effect that moved us into a situation where a bunch of people who we now refer to as capitalists had a load of power, but they didn't have political power. So then they kind of had this violent seizure of political power. So the reason I think the reason why revolutions we have this idea of these kind of this violent seizure of power is just that's the name we give to those things. But when you read sort of Marx's account of the development of capital, he's clearly talking about a process of transition from feudalism to capitalism that goes on for a couple of hundred years, and he refers to that as the revolution that brought in capitalism. So it's not kind of that the sudden violent uprising part of it is the end power. It's the political world catching up with the economic changes, and there's no necessary reason why it has to be like that. Marx was talking in his earlier life, he only had those capitalist revolutions to look back on, and if you're going to have huge social change and you look back and you see these bloody revolutions, you kind of assume naturally that's how things are going to change in the future. But by the end of his life, he was looking at moves towards democracy. The first universal suffrage was New Zealand in 1893, so he'd been dead by 10 years for 10 years by that time. But he could see this was coming, and he was saying, well, why would you? He kind of wrongly assumed that as soon as you had universal suffrage, the working class would just vote for socialists. He kind of underestimated the power of the media and tradition and deference and that kind of thing. But it was clear to him that if there is a peaceful way to do this, why would you have a violent uprising? Why would you put yourselves through that? Why would you risk all that?
Well, I think that there's a way that you can square this circle. You can have your reforms and your violent revolution too. Indeed, and I'm jumping a little to the end with your prescription, because there's some very provocative and interesting proposals that you have, but ones which could succeed within the logic, the formal technical logic of democratic systems in the Anglosphere. But precisely because it might be successful, at some point it's going to attract opposition that will not stop at the legal, formal limits of political action in democracies. That just like the liberal capitalist transition provoked backlash from feudal forces, not everywhere and not to the same extent everywhere. But I think that you have to, historically speaking, it's difficult to, you have to acknowledge that those kinds of ambitious programs attract the sort of opposition that might make some kind of violent confrontation inevitable.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably true, but I think that is what you're doing then is you're defending your kind of democratic rights to do things against,
Yes.
counterinsurgency,
Yes.
rather than thinking we're going to seize the means of production by violent methods.
Exactly. There's a great distinction to be made between the political violence in self-defense or in defense of a project with a popular mandate versus political violence against the sort of moral and cultural logic of an existing system, right?
Sure.
One is much more defensible and constructive than the other, although in both cases, ultimately, you need to succeed if your results are durable, right? I mean, better to be the Swedish Social Democrats than the Bolshevik Party, but better be the Bolsheviks than Allende in Chile.
Yeah.
Grim.
Yeah.
It's,
Well, let me
it's
ask.
weird. Sorry.
Go ahead.
It's something that I think is. I kind of tend to look, as you referred to the Anglosphere, I kind of tend to think we're probably the last place that to look for kind of signs of progress, because the UK and the USA particularly did so well out of capitalism. We're kind of the forefront, at the forefront of capitalism at different stages, and because of that, we are always looking back to these glory days, and whereas in other countries, people don't have this kind of obsession with the past and how great they were. So they're much freer to look forward, and they see it as kind of less challenging, I think, in a lot of places. And I think of all the kind of experiments going on in the world there are experiences. There's an experiment in Wales coming up with universal basic income, but Britain and America aren't normally the places that we think of that are going to be more progressive. Maybe New Zealand, Scandinavia, Germany, Spain. There's loads of Portugal. There's loads of things going on that are kind of encouraging signs, and or Britain between 45 and 79 really was a kind of a really good example of the direction we should be going in. But I think it's probably unlikely to come from Britain or America. We'll be trailing along, kicking and screaming at the back.
And to what extent do you think that also reflects, because Britain and America not only economically did well under capitalism, but they were the last and current centers of world capitalist hegemony, London and now New York, Washington. And when you look at support for capitalist institutions in these countries, you have a great deal of identification between the political system, the economic system, and the sort of soul of the country, right? That to be American without being a constitutional capitalist is insane, right? Like it ideologically incoherent. But when you look issue by issue, then you have this sort of distribution across the income spectrum that you'd expect, with a great deal of support for single payer healthcare, a great deal of support for a higher minimum wage, all kinds of progressive political programs. I'm curious as to whether the most reactionary element isn't within the middle class, that because if you're middle class in New Zealand, in most of continental Europe, in Canada, in the developed countries of Asia, you're not special. You're comfortable, but you're not special. The position that you have in kind of global hierarchies is nothing to be too proud of. But and you point this out with in your section about how a huge part of the benefits of wealth come from being able to command the labor of the less wealthy, right? What's the point of having all the money in the world to buy all the stuff in the world if you can't have a butler, if you can't have a maid, if you still have to pick up your own dry cleaning?
Heaven forbid.
Heaven forbid. And
to say the least.
It looks like and the position of the middle class in the very core countries of capitalism has a little bit of that flavor of hierarchy and authority that is missing elsewhere. It identifies more with elite position, the elite class, and a structure which allows them to look down, than because there's no reason why the middle class can't form a coalition on at least certain issues with working class socialists. There are huge areas of overlap. The people who stole your 401k or who privatized you out of a job in the NHS, they aren't working class scroungers, right? They're the financial vampires of the city of London and New York, and they aren't buying vacation timeshare in Florida, right? They own an island in every ocean. So one reason why you may be more pessimistic about the UK and the US as laboratories for innovating beyond capitalism is because of this, of the dread appeal of social hierarchy, right? The sort of siren call of identifying with the billionaire, especially in economic structures that so severely stigmatize, not just deprive economically, but stigmatize socially and culturally people who fail to hit that respectability level of property.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I guess the first question is what do we mean by middle class? Because I think that's that means something different in the States. It
yes.
seems to mean something different to what it means here in the UK. So in the UK, if you ask people what are the kind of hallmarks of a middle class family, one of the first things that people will say is that they send their kids to private school. But that's about 7% of the population, and you need to be in the top 10% of earners really to have, certainly to have two kids at at any private school. You've got to be in the top 10, maybe 15 at a push percent. So they're not the people in the middle. They're not the median. They're not the kind of the middle 20% or the middle 30% or something. When people say the middle class, they mean kind of from %3 to %8 of the wealthiest people, which but I think that in itself is a weird thing, because people kind of assume that there are a lot more of the middle class and that it's not that far away, and if they work hard, and people think if they do well, they'll attain that. But obviously there's a huge gap between that position and most people. But I think and I'm not sure about this, but my assumption is that in the US, middle class means more kind of an ordinary family, kind of in the middle of the income distribution. Would that be right?
Well, that's the thing. There's a bit of a process of subtraction that goes on with, especially post-war, just like the post-war period in the UK was kind of a golden age for the working class. It with slightly different language and a slightly different set of institutions and programs. It was also a golden age of for certain kinds of American workers. And at that point, you could get a home, buy a home, pay off your debt, have access to things like very inexpensive public education. And so the idea was that something like home ownership and a vacation, a family vacation a year, a middle class lifestyle, middle class level of consumption, that was within reach of many white male headed households for that middle part of the century, and that becomes what's described as middle class, people who achieve that level of comfort and financial security. And the assumption was that this would be permanent and indeed eventually perhaps universal, apart from the underclass that nobody likes, that don't deserve it anyway. But it turns out that those gains can be dissolved over the course of a generation under sufficiently exploitative neoliberal reforms. They don't just offshore the working class jobs, they'll also liquidate property, and that's too small to pool into the 10% that you describe as kind of the British middle class, right? The people who would be described as upper middle class in the US, but who are at this point look like they might be the only ones that can survive a steady slide into immiseration under neoliberal conditions.
Yeah, I think as well, talking about kind of like you were saying about can the there are loads of policies that the working class and that most of the middle class would agree on and should kind of be allies on, and how come we're not getting these, and why do we not get these in the UK? Why do people in Denmark have better healthcare than people in the US? Why do people in New Zealand have things that people in the UK can't? That we used to have that we're losing. And part of that is, and this isn't really about the end of capitalism. It's just about, I guess it's about the kind of doing late stage capitalism in a way that might help us to be one of the countries that moves forward. Is that we just have the UK and the US. One thing they share is terrible electoral systems. So we have governments that have a governing majority in parliament. They can, they can govern, but they're voted in by a third of the people. Usually, I mean, 39% is enough to get a Tory government here, and that's 39% of the vote. So it's only about kind of probably less than 30% of the electorate are continually giving us governments that most people don't want. And you have the same. You've just had the midterms in the US. You use the same system for the House of Representatives as we use for Parliament, and it's an undemocratic system that ends up with you getting loads of people that you don't want in Congress. And obviously the Senate is worse. And then you've got the Electoral College for the president. So,
same system in Canada. And
Canada and Belarus. And I think we've run out there by the time. Italy have a partially first past the post system as well.
Although I feel like, as a good political scientist, I should point out that the electoral system isn't the only place where you've got which determines kind of the level of democracy and the permeability of the political structure to sort of public demands or participation. And one of the observations I made, one of the thoughts I had when I was reading your final section was, and as well as your comparisons with the period of the labor ascendancy, the post-war labor ascendancy in the UK, was that this would require a lot of cadres to implement. You need states that can govern with a staff that is technically capable, committed to the job, if not the project, and having a willingness to play a leadership role. And one of the consequences of Thatcher and Reagan style neoliberalism is the hollowing out of state structures. The civil service becomes a joke and a constant butt of a constant target for vilification, even by the putative left. Obama, for instance, was the first president that presided over a decrease in the number of federal employees, and the elevation of private sector higher pay but lower social benefit jobs in private sector consulting or finance, etc. And those parts of the private sector become the de facto administrative state, or at least a critical component of it. So how do you regenerate that administrative capacity within the state so that it isn't exercised at the whim of capital? And the other observation is that the party structure is also crucial. The fact that you have multiple parties in Canada, which is the same Westminster model as the UK, and there are multiple parties in the UK as well. That's a cultural construct, and so are rules about lengths of campaigns. A Canadian election, you don't know it's coming, and then it happens, blink, you miss it. And political parties in Canada come and go. There's a couple of larger, more durable ones, but even then, even those have been fundamentally reshaped several times because they don't have the resources as private institutions to necessarily be able to weather an electoral catastrophe. People can defect out of them, and parties that were once dominant can become completely irrelevant. In the US, the size and penetration into the economy, into media, across all major institutions of the two-party system is another reason why you don't get democratic outcomes, even with putatively democratic electoral structures.
I think, I think as you say, the electoral system isn't the only source of, it's not the only thing to look at, but also it is a fundamental thing that if it's wrong, then it's going to be very difficult to get anything else right. And so, for example, the way that feeds into the two-party system is that it encourages, obviously in America, it's going to be really hard for a third party under your current system. You've got to, who's going to vote? You know, the vote for a third party is tiny because it's basically a wasted vote. But if you change your House of Representatives electoral system to proportional representation, you would, at the next election, you would get at least one or two, either Green or Libertarian Party or whatever. You would get small party representatives. Then, as soon as people realised that that was happening, that would build, and they would then, obviously, if you've got representation in the House, I guess you get. I mean, here it happens. I guess you get some kind of state funding to run your office and some sort of assistance. So it's not this. None of this stuff is going to happen overnight. But if you want to break down the two-party system in the States, the first thing to do is to introduce a democratic electoral system where whoever your vote counts for, whoever you vote for, your vote counts the same as everybody else's. And that's a way to, it makes the elections democratic. It removes things like gerrymandering. There's no point in doing gerrymandering if you have a proper electoral system. It doesn't make any difference to the result. But it also does things like break down the two-party system. It gives smaller parties higher visibility. And you could do things like, there's an idea that I refer to in the book. It's not, these are things, none of these things are going to solve the problem of capitalism, but they're all sort of things. Let's do these things first, and then we can start tackling the bigger problems. But among these kind of small things that are kind of should be an easy thing to implement is that Thomas Piketty suggests this idea where everyone gets a state voucher and for funding political parties. There's no funding allowed, no donations allowed. Of course, people are going to find ways to get around it, but it makes it much harder for them. So basically, everybody gets a voucher from the government, and you choose which political party to give it to. So you can, you might just think, well, you'd get the smaller parties would then start to get a realistic amount of funding from.
Or whichever party has millionaire backers that will buy the vouchers will be able to squeeze out public funding from everyone else. So imagine you have a voucher system in the UK. So everyone from Northern Ireland to the Channel Islands can hand over a ticket worth 100 quid to whoever convinces them. But the legacy Tory party is like, we'll pay you 120 quid if you just give it to us.
Why would that make any sense?
Because if you have money, thanks to,
that would be illegal, obviously, so they'd have to do it.
Well, that's the thing. It's a little, and this is one of the things that I was alluding to, that you're going to attract opposition to your program that is going to find techniques like that to perpetuate their domination even through the reforms. And then you're going to need more reforms in order to prevent those tactics from succeeding, and as soon as you make something illegal, you then have to worry about, well, do we have the cadres and the force to make it stick? Whether it's lawyers or whether it's constables or whether it's inspectors.
And there are problems like this with current funding rules. They're quite strict.
Oh, absolutely.
Funding in the UK and declaring donations and everything else. And there are ways that people get around it. And there were things in the EU referendum.
One thing I
got taken to court afterwards for breaking the rules, but actually it was too late then because the referendum had happened and they got the result they want, and the 50 grand fine or whatever was irrelevant to them.
Exactly. If you are already backed by capital then mild disciplinary measures like a 50,000 pound fine that would smother a leftist party, or one which requires popular funding and operates on a shoestring, right? The current, billionaire prime minister would just shrug it off. He probably pays more for a game of golf. And
these things, I'm not saying there would be no way of getting around these things, but it's measures that they would certainly make a difference, wouldn't they? They would mean, say, for example, in the UK, the Green Party would have a lot more money. If that was the system, loads of people support the Green Party but don't vote for them because our electoral system makes it pointless unless you live in Brighton. So, but those people would probably give their voucher to the Green Party, so the Green Party would get some money. The fact that there are other people that the Tories are kind of getting, people that are kind of disinterested, don't really care who gets their vote, maybe would take some kind of a backhander to give their money to the Tories. The Tories would still end up with less than they've got now, or maybe the same, but proportionally less, because the smaller parties, the Greens, Liberal Democrats, and SNP, and people would get.
I think you're. The program that you sketch out, and I think it's only the last 10 pages where I'm looking forward to the next book that blows that up into 100.
It's kind of an afterword, that bit, really. It's kind of saying, here are some things that we could do now. Here's some low-hanging fruit that we can just go and get,
which is important, right? We always talk about like trying to, immiserate some of the suffering, and Jean Bajlan says it all the time. A little bit of social democracy, especially in the Western world, goes a long way.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think the program is sound. I don't want to sound too negative about it, but a program needs institutions to shepherd it, protect it, and implement it.
Yeah.
And the source of my despondency about the prospects for the kind of transformation that our global society needs in order to simply remain healthy, in order to simply remain alive, let alone become more just, is that in the Anglosphere, at least, I don't see either the institutions that can push for those kinds of reforms that can make that program achievable, or the beginnings of the seeds from which those kinds of institutions can grow. I agree with you that one of the most sensible and constructive moves would be to just split the Labour Party, because out of the socialist remnant, you might create that kind of institution.
But that can't be done until we have a different electoral system. It would just be suicide to happen now.
Then it's chicken and the egg.
Then we, that would be a really good move. That could happen almost immediately if and these are all big ifs, but if it's not an entirely implausible scenario, if the next election gave us a hung parliament and the Liberal Democrat leader had enough of whoever it is at the time, had enough about him or her to say, I'm not going coalition with anyone unless we have PR, which has been their policy for years, and they've been in 2 coalitions in my lifetime and not demanded it.
Nick Clegg.
Yes, yeah. I mean, Clegg was fobbed off with a referendum on AV, which isn't even PR. So I don't know what happened. He just wanted to be deputy prime minister, didn't he? But that if they had enough about them to actually say, well, we're not having, a condition of our coalition is that we introduce a decent electoral system for the next election, then the Labour Party would split. Before that next election happened, the Labour Party would split into 2, and there would probably be a period where there are a load of little competing socialist splinters. But come election time, they would need to start putting candidates up, and they would probably then kind of congeal around some of the ones with some big names in, or that were doing quite well. So I think there is a potential there for the Labour Party to split, and then the Labour Party could have the Socialist Party that came out of that could have some MPs, maybe some, and a bargaining position. If you want us in a coalition, here's some red lines. We need these minimum things, and we need 2 seats on the front bench or something. And that starts to drag us. It's not getting us anywhere near the end of capitalism. I guess, conversation goes where it goes, but we're kind of focusing on kind of the smaller things, and the book is often. I don't want people to get the impression that I've written a book called The End of Capitalism. It's all about changing the electoral system, but it's it's a path worth going down. That would then give the Labour Party something that we could start moving the country, in the right direction.
I harp on this because so much of your book for me was simply correct, right? The first you have an accessible and simplified, but you have a potted history of the development of capitalism from a Marxist perspective, and you hit all of them. You get everything. You give a very fair and justifiable reading. Your section on the ethics of it too, for me, it was concur. You quote Nigel Ashford from the Institute of Humane Studies, who I've met personally. He gave me 500 Coke bucks for a conference before I knew what it was.
500 Coke bucks means you were his dealer for a key bump, or does that
KOCH?
Oops.
Well, I mean, better me than anybody else. And
your speech.
But yes, I've been kind of pushing you into the last section because that's where I have kind of my quibbles and questions. But
sure.
Let's return to the big picture stuff. And Jason, I know you had a question.
MT has a question.
I do have a question. So
she wrote 12 questions.
I wrote a bunch of questions, and then you started talking, and some of them just got thrown out because you've been sort of answering them along the way, which is great. I do have a question here. How were turnips and sheep manure more important than Cromwell and Robespierre? So I've been thinking about these smaller steps that happen that add up to a revolution. At one point in your book, you talk about decoupling work and rewards, but I think we may need to find a way to decouple the idea of revolution and sudden change. We're ignoring the sheep and the turnips right now. I think it's a little bit of an addiction. What do you think?
Well, the sheep and the turnips was because they were sheep manure and turnips were kind of important discoveries in increasing agricultural production, without which we couldn't have had a non-agricultural population. In 1500, 3/4 of the people worked on the land, so they're each producing enough food for themselves and a third of another person. So that's no basis for the Industrial Revolution. So all the kind of the developments that happened before that allowed the Industrial Revolution and the full development of capitalism. So they were important, and I think the point I'm trying to make there is with we generally get taught at school, it's certainly in England, I'm guessing in America as well, we get taught this kind of great man idea of history where it's all about kings and battles and big events. And the point I'm trying to make is that those things, of course, it's important to learn that kind of narrative history about what happened and who did what and why. But if you get too stuck on this great men and battles and kings kind of narrative, then you might imagine that things like so there was the Battle of Edge Hill was the first big battle in the Civil War. If the Royalists had won that, then so what? That wouldn't, that's talked about in English history as like a really significant battle. But and the fact that the royalists didn't win it meant that they eventually lost the war, and that kind of was the ascendancy of the bourgeoisie. But of course, if they'd lost that, if the royalists had won that battle, there would have been another one, or there would have been some other process. It's not the case that if Prince Rupert hadn't been a really bad military leader and lost that battle, then capitalism just wouldn't have happened. It would still obviously have, history would have been slightly different. But the big change, which was the advent of capitalism, was still going to happen, whether Cromwell or Robespierre or Prince Rupert or whoever it is did what they did, or they did something differently. Those kind of big moments and great men and kings and battles, they're kind of incidental to the story. They're part of the narrative, but they don't explain what happened and why. Whereas things like sheep manure and turnips do. And sorry, I've forgotten the other part of your question.
Decoupling revolution from sudden change.
Yes, and I think, and we've covered this a little bit earlier, and I think when we talk about revolution, we don't know. I don't own these terms. If somebody wants to say a revolution, the term revolution equals, storming the Winter Palace, then that's fine. But I think I'm kind of writing broadly from a Marxist perspective, and certainly Marx talks about revolution as being the transformation from one economic structure to another. And when he describes that transformation in England from the kind of 1500 to the middle of the 19th century, that's how long it takes. And yes, there are flashpoints. We do cut a king's head off in there, and we do have a civil war, but those things didn't. The revolution would have happened without cutting the king's head off. The changes are still going to happen. And the changes were, we got from feudalism into capitalism. That's the revolution, rather than the 9-year civil war and the regicide. So I think, for me, you can't, as I say, we don't own these terms. I'm not the arbiter of what revolution means, but I think when we look at history from the point of view that Marx looked at it, and from the ones on the left look at history, the revolution is the transition, not the storming of the Winter Palace.
Your earlier book, Unlearning Marx, you talk a lot about the Russian Revolution and the USSR.
Yeah.
And there seems to be kind of an idea that, and I don't know how much of it has to do. I had this conversation with Jean Bajlan off air one day, that maybe just because we live in a moment where instantaneously every desire can be met, that we think change also comes instantaneously. And I think there's ideas of political change that may seem more drastic than they really are, i.e. the Republicans are all fascists now. I don't know if Donald Trump was that much different or worse than Ronald Reagan.
Well, I think that's an excellent point you make about the difficulty of looking at things over long periods of time in a culture of instant gratification. People think that revolution, when they're in their consumer mindset, which they're primed to be all of the time by the culture and the economy, they imagine revolution as playing Cyberpunk 2077. But revolution is actually making Cyberpunk 2077. All of the coding, all of the coordination, all of the desperately trying to sort out bugs, working with other institutions, all of the work, and less of the mantis blade decapitations.
It's fascinating to me because when we think of history, it's almost like we still think of it in these quick blocks of time, which is, it's kind of like, that's so insane. Like, we do multiple shows on things like Native American enslavement, which wasn't 25 years, it was like hundreds of years, right?
I like when Zoomers refer to the late 20th century, right?
Oh yeah, that period.
Oh, you mean my childhood?
Yeah. So, there's someone in the chat saying that we live in a fascist America, and I was like, we'll define fascism. And then it's just, senseless rhetoric about Native American slaughter and the military industrial complex. It's just words.
Well, that's the thing too, and that's one thing that I appreciate about your book when you introduce a concept that has different understandings in popular usage, in Marxist language, in other academic or ideological fields. You go out of your way to say, this is how I'm going to use it, and this is what implications it has. For instance, our conversation about revolution. And it's absolutely necessary, because without that kind of clarity, you move words around all day, and it becomes a matter less of clarity and more volume.
Someone said,
yeah, I think with capitalism itself as well, it's important to have a kind, lots of people seem to think capitalism means, particularly people on the right, kind of think capitalism means buying and selling things. And, as if that didn't happen until the 16th century or something.
Until Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, well, yes. Yeah, and, and I've even had comments. I had one comment on my book. I'd said something on Twitter, and somebody came and commented, well, you've got a book about how capitalism ends, and you're selling it, hypocrite. It's like, well, people sold books before capitalism. They're going to sell books after capitalism. They're not. This isn't a capitalist thing. Making, buying, and
there was a before capitalism.
Not only that, but you can't opt out of the capitalist system. I mean, I suppose you can once you have $40 million. That might be the floor. Then you can live like a hippie at Esalen and spend all day saying namaste. But if you are under the condition of needing to support yourself because you don't have a giant pile of cash that your parents gifted you from your great grandparents, slavery and sexism corporation, then you end up having to just work within the system. You can't opt into the Comintern, right? Like, there's no place that you show up and it's like, I would just like to work for the revolution, please. Issue me, issue me my tracksuit, and which corner do I unroll my hobo bindle?
But also, if people think that writing books about the end of capitalism is going to be buying me a flash new car or something, then they're kind of very much
on zero books, right?
Yes, yeah. I still have 2 jobs.
The name of the press comes from how much you get in royalties.
Yeah, it's marginally above zero, but it's not very much.
As I suspected, this was going to be a spicy show, so the chat is getting fired up about their ideas of what is capitalism and crony capitalism, and everything is fascist. And
capitalism is what I don't like. Fascism is what I don't like that other people like. And that's part of the conflation, and that's part of the terminology problem. When you jump to justification before doing the analytic work, before setting up your definitions, then for conservatives, capitalism becomes America, apple pie, Christianity, Jesus. And for people on the left, it is not only the economic structure, but everything else that you don't like, right? It's toxic fandoms on the internet. It's too many franchises in the the multiplex, and whether or not you can find a persuasive link between those phenomena, that is not what capitalism is.
And what is your definition of capitalism, Steve, that you bring forth?
So I tell you, I mean, I'm not taking credit for it. It's Marx's definition. Or, you know, Marx never actually, with a lot of things, and it would have been much better if he had done it, Marx didn't actually sit down and write, this is my definition of capitalism. But, you know, we can take what he did write about capitalism. And there are, even within a Marxist tradition, there are different interpretations, and there isn't one kind of author, sort of credentialed Marxist interpretation of what capitalism is. There are competing ideas about what Marx really meant and which bits he said were more important. But I go with the parts where Marx argues that capitalism is an economic structure. So it's the sum of production relations within a society, or any economic structure is the sum of production relations within a society. And production relations are basically who owns what of productive resources. So mines, factories, forests, but also you know, mineral resources, intellectual property, but also labor power and also people. So, you know, in lots of human history, one of the things you could own was another person. And, you know, that under capitalism, you can't do that, but you can buy people's labor power. So the definition, the defining kind of what defines a capitalist economic structure is that the dominant production relation is that most people own no means of production, but they do own their own labor power. And that really is a contrast. The way, what Marx is doing when he's making that definition is he's drawing a contrast between pre-capitalist societies, where people often didn't own all their own, generally didn't own all of their labor power. They may have owed some of their labor power a couple of days a week or whatever to their feudal superior, the lord of the manor. But also they couldn't just go and sell their labor, but they didn't own any of their labor power, in that they could just go and sell it on the open market. They were tied to the manor by a kind of web of feudal customs and obligations. On the other hand, they did often have some kind of, no, they're not my photographs, just responding to the, they're my girlfriend's Canadian, they're photos of Canada. I don't know who took them. Obviously not all of Canada, they're just little bits of Canada.
That's all you need. That's all you need. There's so much nothing in the middle. That's all.
It all looks like that. It all looks like that.
Just the nothing in the middle. Ugh.
I've lost my thread now, but yeah. So people before capitalism quite often did own some means of production, or not necessarily own them, but have some kind of claim on them, similar to ownership rights. So they would be allowed to graze animals on the common, or to collect firewood from a spinney, or to dig peat, or to do whatever it was. So some of the means of production that they used, they had some claim on, and it was part of the revolution that ushered in capitalism, was to remove those claims that people for generations had on this plot of land that they were living on and growing their food on and grazing their cattle on. And firstly, physically removing it through the process of enclosure, literally just putting fences up around it and evicting people. But then over time as well, removing this kind of, it doesn't take many generations for people to forget that their family used to occupy this bit of land that kind of belonged to them and which they could make their subsistence from.
And MT, were there some questions from the chat that you wanted to ask?
There were some questions from the chat.
Were any of them about what is fascism?
No.
Fascism is the military. What?
To talk about democratic socialism. I enjoy that you don't position them as the enemy, and you don't spend a lot of time trashing them. You also don't spend a lot of time trashing capitalism. So yeah, we have a question from Donald James. Capitalism has a role in democratic socialism? Question.
Historically, it's had a role in providing the kind of material abundance and the productive capacity for us to move into to successfully move into and maintain a socialist system. But I don't know. I don't think capitalism has a role in the future of democratic socialism.
I'd also.
I don't think. I think.
Well, I think that this is a place where the markets versus capitalism distinction is useful, because you might have markets,
Sure. Yeah.
but without the allied structures of high finance, without lobbying, without the commodification of absolutely everything, even if they were relatively sophisticated, and even if you had douchey yuppie type guys making deals and flipping houses, as long as it was constrained from becoming systemic, then it may or may not be useful. Like, markets are a tool that might or might not be helpful, but the whole point of democratic socialism and the whole argument of your book is that we need to go beyond capitalism as a system.
Sure. And I think with that definition of capitalism as a situation in which most people don't own any of the means of production, we don't tend to own any factories or workshops or mineral resources or whatever. With that, then there's, so what's the alternative to a small group of people owning that? One alternative that might spring to mind is that we share it out then. So we all own our own little bit of the planet, and we choose to do what we like with it and engage in kind of free transactions with everybody else. That, in a way, that would still be capitalism if you kind of, somehow divided up the planet so everybody had an equal amount and was then allowed to truck barter and exchange. The problem with that is it's not actually possible to do. It's not, we can't fight, how would you do that? It's not a thing that can happen. And even if you could come up with a system where you had some sort of equal distribution, that would be, so just as a little diversion, Robert Nozick has this if you guys are familiar with his Wilt Chamberlain thought experiment, and where he says, even if I argue against Nozick quite a lot in the book, but this one point he makes, he says, even if you distributed everything perfectly equally, and you outlawed any kind of coercive exchange, so people are only making voluntary exchanges, you'll have someone like Wilt Chamberlain. Everybody wants to see him perform, and so everybody pays kind of 25 cents a time, and after a while he's now really rich and everybody else is a little bit poorer, and that's that. So your equal distribution has been destroyed by the fact, by nothing, by harmless free transactions among free people. So to some extent that's kind of true. It's basically, it's only true, they notice, under a capitalist system. So he's saying equality couldn't be maintained under a capitalist system. If Wilt Chamberlain was like a council employee or a state employee, then he would just be getting paid some wages for doing his thing, and everybody would be paying to watch them. So that kind of, that means that you can do it under capitalism. The question, could you do it at all? It doesn't really make sense to have this idea where everybody privately owns their share of the planet. People are dying and being born every day at a rapid rate. We don't even have the computing power to even work out what everyone would get, let alone the ability to kind of physically distribute that wealth in that way. So the answer then has to be some kind of common ownership, but I'm fairly agnostic about whether that means, obviously some things the national grid lends itself to being owned by the state, by a national body. But many things could be owned by local cooperatives or industry-wide cooperatives. There's all kinds of possibilities, and I discuss some of those in the book. And to some extent, yes, some markets might well exist in that situation, but they're markets that would be based on would be based on a system that wasn't one where a tiny number of people start off with everything. And that's one of the things that keeps coming up in the ideology section, is capitalists kind of, most of their defenses about how great capitalism is start after they've already distributed the stuff and they've ended up with owning almost everything among a tiny group of people, and then anything you want to change is suddenly not fair. But actually, why don't we go back a step before everything got given to a small number of people, and then work out what's fair from that point of view?
Also, I think that the whole capitalism equals freedom trick that is used where, and this was one of the issues that completely delegitimized things like Freedom House rankings for me, where they enshrined the sanctity of private property into their very definition of freedom, so that a country like Cuba would be intrinsically less free than Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia has private companies. And I think that it's also important here, when we talk about property, to distinguish between personal property and
Sure.
what we're really talking about, which is the means of production. One of the great Bolshevik pledges was land to the peasants, that a family or a village would no longer work land for a noble or religious institution or the state, but would actually have their little plot of earth. And similarly, one of the great post-Soviet measures that was incredibly popular to get public buy-in for the transition to market economies was that whatever home you lived in was now yours. It didn't belong to the state anymore. It's yours. You could keep it. It couldn't be taken from you. You could sell it if you wanted, but it was yours, free and simple. And that, for many people, one, it's a tangible material benefit. Two, it intuitively feels right. The people who work the land should own it. The people who live in housing should own it. And the trick is to divorce ideas of ownership from the capitalist structure, where ownership essentially means being able to extract profits and being able to sell something financially. And things become tricky when you go that far. Like personal property, no branch of socialism says that the state owns your toothbrush. Nobody wants your toothbrush. No commissar is going to come for it. And I think that. Wait, what kind of toothbrush do you have?
It's a Quip. It's mechanical. It's, yeah.
How are you able to afford one of those on TIR salary?
I have noted down your coordinates. You will be contacted shortly.
Okay.
But depending on the whatever structure you want to adopt, and maybe homes become personal property as well, but which needn't be that disruptive as long as there are strict restrictions on its accumulation. That's one of the demonic elements, mechanisms of capitalism. The accumulation, you create property, but then it accumulates into smaller and smaller number of hands, and that accumulation accelerates because the more property you control, the more power you have to leverage out the property of others.
Take that.
But nobody wants your toothbrush. You can keep it.
Speak for yourself. Tony Smith, don't ever hold on. Let me say this. This. There's a person in the chat named Tony Smith. Don't ever act like you know anything about Pascal Robert and what he thinks about what fascism is. Because Pascal Robert would tell you that we don't live in a fascist country. Things are unequal in this country. And things, well, not in your country, but don't ever try to put Pascal's name on something as if you know what he thinks and how he feels about your argument, because you really wouldn't like what he'd have to say. Moving on.
I wanted to, since we were kind of talking about dem socks a bit, you pretty generous with them. as well as liberals. You didn't spend time trashing liberals either in your book. I do just want to read this quote, and maybe you can respond to it if you like. I just really like this small passage. So the main difference between the liberal left and the socialist left is that the former calls out capitalism for not living up to its own standards, while the latter argues that those standards would be insufficient even if they were met. In terms of today's choices, the socialist left takes all of the rights and demands of the liberal left and adds to them to root out economic disadvantage too. The liberal left has little reciprocal interest in adding socialist objectives to its agenda. I thought that was remarkably clear.
You know what? Shout out to MT for doing the reading.
Yeah, it wasn't just Cuba. It wasn't just Cuba.
Can we first of all, before you even answer that, Steve, we just need to call out Jean Bajlan, who is a wonderful man and a great dad, but he lagged on getting us the book. And so he kept saying, I think for a week, he's like, I'm gonna get you guys Steve's book. I'm gonna get you. So we got it like not very long ago. Right. I'm not going to say exactly when.
I mean, 3 hours is plenty of time.
The best show was when Marcus was like, look, whatever book Jason gives me, I read it an hour. I try to read as much as I can an hour before the show. But seriously, I always rag on everybody behind the scenes about not doing the reading. And MT always makes fun of me for that. So I want to give you a big shout out again.
Appreciate that.
Because I have all the highlighted questions I wanted to ask him, and I don't have to because you did the reading. So
yeah, I did the reading, and we didn't use my questions either.
Yeah, no. Jason is like a proper TA. He assigns readings. Then his work is done.
That's it.
That is so not true. Go ahead, MT.
So yes, so I guess part of it is that I'm trying to look at this in it's a process. There is some continuity there, and it's partly, I guess, it relates a bit to what Jason was saying, as we tend to think of these little chunks of history, but actually loads of stuff happened for a long time. And I think that's also true of transitions. I mean, it's almost as if by the time capitalism arrives, we're already transitioning. Even just a welfare state of any description is a move away from pure capitalism. It's a recognition that okay, we can't just have pure capitalism. So before, and we still obviously have, in the UK, we've still got the House of Lords, so we've still got hangovers and the monarchy. We've got hangovers from feudalism still in there, and yet and at the same time we used to have the National Health Service. So we're kind of this transition happens all the time, and there are lots of kind of starts and dead ends and 2 steps forward and 1 step back, I guess. So I think we need to see this as a continuity, and I think I guess that comes back to Marx's idea that capitalism is what makes socialism possible. So there's that, and then I think that quote comes from the ideology section where I'm talking about what terms left and right mean. And obviously, again, I don't own these terms. I'm just giving an interpretation of a way of looking at this spectrum. And one of the things you can bear in mind is that when the terms obviously arose from the seating arrangements in the National Assembly in France at the time of the revolution, and the left were the revolutionaries and the right were the old order. And the left were sorry, Jason's just
I read the chat.
Oh, right, okay.
Don't read the chat.
I've got something in front of me.
Don't read the
You do not stare directly into the chat.
Yeah.
It's true.
It's the Ark of the Covenant. It will suck you in.
No, I've got it covered up with a book.
You are a I physically cannot do that with my setup, but you are a genius for doing that because they are talking about Cuba and it's hilarious right now.
Right. Okay.
No.
Now I have to look at the chat. Thanks a
I'm
lot.
ignoring them now, aren't I?
I want to say before you finish answering your question, I think even though you say Unlearning Marx is a bit of an academic read, I think it was a good read. I definitely learned a lot. from that book and from our conversation that we got to have after. And this book as well was one of those things where as soon as I opened it or downloaded it,
After
it was
the
like,
experience.
yeah, it was kind of like, so I think November 25th it drops.
That's right. Yeah. On
And,
Friday.
and I want to amen Jason. After reading that book and doing that episode with you, when the opportunity came to be on today, I jumped at it. I was very eager, and I'm delighted that I did.
I thought you were. You know what? I thought you were saying that because you were like, "Oh, do you guys need me?" I didn't know.
I always want to be invited, right? Like,
Jeez.
I feel
We
bad.
always need-
I know you're a busy Cuba, so I don't want to mess with you. And so I'm so okay. We got to stop having off-air conversations, Steve.
yeah, this is.
But seriously, Steve, we're gonna fawn over your book for a second. And I know another reason why MT read your book, because this isn't the first reading that she's had. She'll be like, I don't want to come on the show. I don't really give
I do that. I do that.
Like something. She's like, do you really need me for this? I don't really want to be on. She was quiet. I always get a message or a phone when my phone rings. I'm always like, oh, what did I do this time? And I got nothing. So I was either she's gonna last minute say, I didn't fucking read it, or she's gonna be all into it. So I sent a message early this morning. I said, if you guys have any questions, put them in the document, right? 14 questions.
Right.
She wrote. That means she's fired up.
I'm fired up.
So she also enjoyed your book as well.
Yeah. Right up my
Okay,
alley.
good to hear. Yeah, thanks, guys.
No, it's an easy read, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And it explains everything very clearly. Go ahead, MT.
No.
Also, from, and I say this as someone who has taught undergraduates, it's a great primer for getting into capital. It's an excellent and sophisticated entry point into Marx, and also the way that you dispose of Nozick and the libertarian defense. You're not strawmanning them, and it's not invective. You point to some serious problems in their own particular structure, which are it's for you Twitter warriors out there, right? Like, you want some ammunition for the next posting war, right? Like, you could do a lot worse than than a very rigorous and well-written ideology section.
Coop, I was this close because I was reading it last night. I was this close to posting passages of it on Twitter. I was like, this is fucking great.
Mm-hmm.
so instead I'm all texting Marcus and Mac. All these, like, I'm getting hella fired up reading it. So yeah, I'm actually excited for when it drops. I want to get a physical copy. We never got our physical copies of Unlearning Marx with the Paxton autograph. I mean, we're still friends with Zero Books, even though we still have content on Zero Books, Steve.
Well, I was kind of caught. This was caught between the transition from the old Zero Books to the new Zero, version 2 to version 3. But I think I was quite surprised actually that they kind of just pushed it through, because I was kind of, Doug's quite kind of Hegelian, isn't he? And I'm kind of a bit to the side of that. But the new Zero Books are even further. I was surprised with Doug, really, because how receptive he was to Unlearning Marx and to this. But then the new guys are even further that way, and I just thought, well, they're gonna want to rewrite or reconsider or something, And I think some authors, they asked for tons of edits and rewrites, but they just waved this one through and just said, no, we like the look of that. Well argued, off you go.
Yeah, you were the perfect timing.
Yeah.
But it was, we won't get into the whole beef, but yeah, that we're friends with Zero. Okay, they still have TIR content on their YouTube channel, Steve.
Yeah.
So we are in our Christmas stockings. We will be expecting our autograph copy of At Least When Capitalism Ends.
Okay. I can run to some autographed copies.
I mean, I can also just buy your book. So I think I'll do that.
But we're not
Yeah,
going to.
that sounds good.
Yeah,
When you
although-
buy it and send it to me, I'll sign it and send it back.
The
Wow.
actually, I'd rather buy a proof copy that you signed,
Right.
so none of the money went to Zero. After all, right? Like let the workers benefit from the fruit of their labor.
I do have some proof copies actually, but I think they were free from Zero. Yeah, so I think I probably.
Yeah, I'll send you an email.
This is the one
Okay.
episode Zero's watching of this show.
I know, right?
Please tell me they have the big not for sale stamp.
They don't, but I can sort that out.
Excellent.
Was there any last question, T? Because we've been going for a couple hours.
Let me. Oh, let's.
I
I
have,
don't know if you want to answer this.
I
one.
have a big date today, and I have to do finish some house cleaning.
Oh boy.
I know.
Uh,
And you're going to
Luke
hear
wants-
all about it.
Luke wants to know if we're all basically Posadists. That's what happens when you're late. That's what happens when you're late.
No.
No.
I consider myself a neo-reformed Posadist, and I don't think anybody that's less Posadist than that can even call themselves a Posadist, let alone right deviationists that don't use the appropriate terminology. So
Artisanal Posadism.
exactly,
Artisanal
free range Posadism.
We'll put that in the description of the show from now on the
Hashtag.
Right.
artisanal Posadism.
Named from Mars says the question is survival of humanity. The current path ends with oligarchs attempting to wait out the death of the ecology in their own bunkers while billions fight in the ashes of civilization.
Correct.
That's why we need
Yeah.
a different path.
I mean, I don't know if people read Douglas Rushkoff, the guy that wrote Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus. I mean, he might be too quote unquote libby for people. I don't know if Steve or Kuba are familiar.
No.
But one of his better known essays that he wrote, and it's a really short essay, he comes in like, he's almost like a Gear to DOS, a non-Gear to DOS kind of guy that like yells at really, really rich tech oligarchs, but they pay him, hundreds of thousands of dollars to yell at them at Google. And so he was speaking in front of a bunch of rich tech oligarchs, and he's talking about it. He wouldn't say who it was. And he gives his normal spiel. I've said this before on the show. He gives his normal spiel, and when he's done, they look at him like, that is great. We get it. But what do we do when money has no value and our drivers and security forces turn on us? What is...
Oh, I have read this.
Mm.
And he was going to whack him. What?
Yeah, and they're like, so the murder callers, is that a thing? Like, from Battle Royale, can we get some?
Can we get some murder callers?
Jeez.
Like
Order
there's
200 more. Alexa, order more.
like we joke about things like that, but to know that these are literal conversations that are happening.
Oh my God. I know how we fund the revolution. We have to sell counterfeit murder callers. Right? Like the technology, it's molded plastic. Like make it look like an iPhone and tell them you can't open it because that'll void the warranty. Have an app like and some lights that flip on and off, right? One or two demonstration models. Everything else just like I don't know, has got is filled with scrap electronics from the junkyard, and you charge them $20,000 a pop, and plus a monthly subscription fee for the software.
For your murder colors.
Get it all figured out.
Yeah, and the irony is that by using that as a pump to get the money out of the oligarchs' hands and into leftist institution building, you can prevent the conditions from the shock collars ever being activated, so they won't even find out.
And Kuba learned all this from watching Andor.
I knew he was onto something when he pulled the Harrison Ford and took his glasses off. I was like, this is going to be interesting.
I saved that for my A+ material.
Appreciate it.
Posadas Farrakhan is who you are from now on, Kuba.
Oh my gosh. One
Nice
more
callback
thing.
to the last show.
Jesus. One more thing. Well, this is an idea that's out there in a number of places. So maybe we can just address it.
Mm-hmm.
And more than one person was talking about it. So here, revolution doesn't work because war doesn't work, just general strike. And we had more comments about this. Public domain says pandemic quarantine was the closest we came to a general strike. And Donald James adds, general strike has never been done before. That's going to take unbelievable organizing. So how do you feel about that as some possibility? We don't have
there
to
was
wait
a general
for the
strike in England in 1926, which ended in failure, largely. Yeah, I mean, I think exactly what we have to do to get there kind of depends on the circumstances at the time. I think industrial action is really, obviously, it was a big deal in the 70s, and it's making a bit of a comeback now, isn't it? Here we've got really strong anti-union laws, probably not as strong as there are in the States actually, but strong compared to what we had, when I started work. But yeah, there's a lot of industrial action, and one of the things I think that is different is that there's a lot of public support for a lot of the action that's happening. There's numerous times I've seen people have posted things on Twitter where some guy's gone from the TV station down to interview some disgruntled commuter who can't get to work on his train because there's a train strike, and the guy's gone, yeah, I can't get to work and it's a real pain in the ass, but actually I support the strikers and they should get a better pay deal. We've got the nurses here have just voted to go on strike. For the first time ever, nurses are going to go on strike in the UK. So when things were different, again, when I was younger, we used to have a situation where the miners would go on strike for the nurses. Miners would have a day of action where they would have a one-day strike.
Solidarity strikes.
In order to, but Thatcher made that illegal during that was part of the build-up to the miners' strike, because she was worried the railway men would go on strike in sympathy with the miners.
But the miners had a strong enough union to support that strike effort as well.
Yeah, well, not for long enough to win the strike, though.
I mean, it got broken. Yeah.
Do you mean for them to a strong enough union to support the strike effort on behalf of the nurses? Yeah, sure. And they would do that, and that was a big thing. You used to see NUM Day of Action, National Union of Mine Workers Day of Action for the NHS, but that's now illegal. So now no one else can do it for them. So the nurses are going to go on strike. I don't know quite what form it's going to take. It's certainly not going to be no nurses going to work that day, because how to lose public support really quickly is loads of people die. So, but there will be, there will be action. There'll probably be picket lines. It will probably be, maybe non-emergency staff or something will be striking. So I think, and obviously in America, there's been this wave of kind of Starbucks and Amazon warehouses and things. I think part of the problem is the workforce is different. The workforce 50 years ago was largely people in big factories working for big corporations, huge workplaces where it was a lot easier to organize. Now there are so many, things have split up a lot.
Yep.
It's,
And I don't think the person that's asking the question about general strikes understands the atomization in the average workplace. And do you think you could get a general strike in a place like Facebook, in a place like Google? You can't even get a union in Amazon, which is one of the biggest employers in the country, if not the biggest. You can't get a union in Walmart. And we really want to talk about unions in these Starbucks. People don't talk about things like collective bargaining and how does that work when you have franchises. So the idea that you're going to have a general strike because you will it to be is almost as silly as saying you can be rich because you have a vision board.
I think it's
a lot
it's
of
not something I would say, it's not, I like the idea of industrial action. I think it can be something that can be used, done well, but it's not a basket you want to put all your eggs in, is it? It's something that has to be part of, there need to be a lot of different things, and we need to deal with the failures of the things like the electoral system and the two-party system, but also we need industrial action, and also we need better rules to encourage kind of workers' cooperatives and things like that. There are lots of different fronts that we need, that's 2 or 3 of them, but we need loads of different fronts, and we need to push on all of them, and industrial action is one of them. But the idea that a general strike is going to do is going to be easy to do and
it's
really effective is not the answer. It's asking a lot.
You can't even get unions to be legal in California for people that work for Uber and Lyft and in the gig economy, first and foremost. And second of all, can you even organize that workforce?
Well, if you don't mind my paraphrasing Jaws, we're going to need a bigger we, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you think about all of any individual item on the list that you gave, and I agree that they're all additive and essential, is a huge lift that requires coordinated action by tens of thousands of people, if not millions, depending on scale, and sustained commitment over a longer period of time, some ideological or social discipline to prevent anybody in a position of responsibility from defecting to the side of Uber or Lyft or Starbucks or Amazon. And that is going to take creating that collective we that can work on that type of scale to implement those programs. I think maybe that should be the next book.
And let me
how do we do that? Because I have no answer.
I think, to be fair, there is a kind of a bit in this book where I kind of skip over saying kind of, okay, this is the what we do. What I've done is I've outlined the whole kind of the big project, and then that.
Oh yeah, I noticed.
Kind of like, this is what we need to be aiming for. But how we organise to do that is that's a whole another book. But even knowing, the point of this book is to know where we should be going and why we can't stay within capitalism, why we have to get beyond capitalism, and what the justification for that. And I have it, answering the ideological questions and everything. But yes, the actual nuts and bolts of how do we organise and do that is not the remit of this book. And it's kind of, I guess it's because the point of the book is, like you say, we need a bigger we need more people on our side, and those people are there that kind of share our goal. And instead of being called a libtard by a tanky, they need someone to say, actually, look, we agree with that. Why don't you move one pace to your left and drag the guy that you're at work with, the right wing guy, or the centrist that you're at work with, or that you play football with, and you have these conversations. Here's some ammunition to go and bring that guy. Here's something for you to think, actually, I could move further to the left without, people don't kind of have that conscious brain, that conscious thought process, but it's something that reading this book hopefully will bring people that are in that position a bit further left, and also give them the ammunition to talk to other people and say, why don't you think of look at it this way? And that maybe brings more people to the left. We all move a bit to the left, then we're going in the right direction.
I mean, that's what Chris Smalls was so, or is. He's, of course, still alive and still, doing his thing with Amazon, but kind of a fascinating story where, you can take people that even had very different ideological beliefs politically, but getting them to get together to strike because they understood the importance of labor power. And that's on a very small level. He did it at one place. And no one's saying we wouldn't like to see those things. But again, when you're talking about an instant gratification epoch, like that's all people want. I want a date. I want food and gourmet food.
Yeah.
Groceries. My laundry folded. It's so instant that now you think you can get social change instantly because you read about it or you see it in snippets. You don't have to do the long form work of research, right? So to sit around and go, well, we need a general strike. It's like, you know what you need? Go organize one workspace. Organize one workspace. Go organize one homeless encampment.
Frankly, I'd settle, go organize one live chat.
Oh my Lord.
Right?
Get everybody to sign up, right? Like, if you're not a Patreon, we'll take labor. And granted, none of our shows have got 1 million subscribers, and it looks like an ecosystem of tiny followings, but 10,000, 20,000, 10,000 more, 20,000 more, just federating the podcast audiences would give us some mass, some like resources to be able to coordinate collective action. But somebody has to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And since this is not, we don't have the Coke money coming through anymore. Again, KOCH, not the south of the border Coke money. But then it has to be, it has to be inspired. It has to be like a combination of willingness and faith, right? Hope perhaps is better than faith. And I think that one of the great things that your book does is it shows that it is not hopeless, that there is a potential path beyond capitalism, which we know is inevitably breaking down. And what remains is whether we'll, as a kind of collective left, will be the ones who are able to take that step beyond capitalism, or whether we'll be dragged into that future by other forces that may not like us much.
And I want to say this. Pascal and I were on a show about a year ago where the show was basically centered around the idea of general strikes. And that came up to Pascal and I as a question. They were like, what do you think of general strike? And I said, well, what does it look like? I mean, do you remember exactly what was said, Toussaint?
What do you think of a general strike?
Mm-hmm.
You guys spent some time clarifying terms,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. But you guys brought in, if I recall correctly, the more practical realities of like strike funds and how exactly is this going to look?
Mm-hmm.
How long will you need to hold out We're
Mhm.
going to go on strike, all of these kinds of things.
And do you
What
remember
are
what
the
that person
demands?
said? Do you remember what that person said, Toussaint?
I do.
You can say it on air.
The person said they were willing to hold out shopping at Amazon for 3 months.
That was the general strike.
Truly, that's a martyrdom operation right there.
That's also it's also a boycott
Yep.
and not a
And we
strike.
yelled out, I think we yelled out in unison, "You mean a boycott?" Yeah.
Yes, it is a boycott.
We've yet to go been invited back on there. But yeah.
We see the energy.
We understand. Everybody here understands frustration. Like,
Yeah.
I literally live in another country because I can't afford to live in the one I'm from. We all understand the frustration. We all see the suffering, or have seen it, have witnessed it, have dealt with it. That's why this book is an important read for the people that want the instantaneous solution.
Right. I'll say two things. Um, I think it's important to work with the labor that we do have, work with the people who are unionized and organized already. If you're going to have a general strike, you should talk to them. Talk to them first. Solidarity strikes can be planned. They don't have to be, oh, I saw this union doing this on TV, on the news. We should do it too. You can. They're ready to be organized. They're organizable, um, and that's another thing we can also strive to be organizable. Because even the chat sometimes it's like, whew. I wanted to share this last comment from someone in the chat because this is one aspect of your book, Steve, that I did really appreciate. So Dig Dug says it's a great comfort to think we are engaged in a very long revolution and aren't just losing over and over. I appreciate that.
I've
Otherwise, we're just in agony and
Mm-hmm.
anxiety and stress, thinking of what we're not doing, how we're not Robespierre. Yeah, go ahead, Kuba.
the I every failure is an opportunity to learn and a moment of clarification. And if the left, and if we as kind of people who care about change in that direction, uh, take these losses as a chance to figure out more about how the system works and what went wrong, then that's an advantage because we know that the right doesn't learn anything, doesn't remember anything or learn anything. I think Talleyrand said that about the Bourbons. They are caught in their own cycles that are as destructive. And yeah, if we, and that's another place where I think that we need everybody's energy and everybody's creativity, because there are institutions that can be durable, cooperatives, certain kinds of political parties, uh, certain community groups, and we should aim towards creating a leftist ecosystem which not only aims for big change, but is creating sustainable small and medium-sized organizations within it that can, survive longer than prestige series, right? At least 6 seasons. But since the struggle, since change can take this piecemeal form, like the revolution is the accumulation of all of these new ways of interfacing and new technologies and new social relations, then we should also think about what kind of social relations, what kind of uses we're putting technology to, what kind of institutions we can make with what we have, rather than just dreaming of the day when we could be Robespierre, when we have the Central Committee, when, right, like when I am dictator.
Which is why Steve's previous book also to me is so important. Unlearning Marx, talking about the failure of the Soviet Union. But Steve, do you have any parting words before we go?
Yeah, well, really, yeah, it's been really good to chat, and I haven't been reading the chat, but I might have a scroll through it later. I can't do two things at once this time.
No, it's you got to watch the show a second time just to figure out why Jason was laughing.
Yes, just to watch the show and the chat.
It's like a whole different show. Look, first and foremost, we love the back and forth, even when we don't agree, because we don't have to agree all the time. The show wouldn't be fun if everybody in the chat attaboyed us all the time. So it is fun to get, I shouldn't say fun, it is fruitful from time to time to get some sort of pushback. So if you disagree with anything we said, leave it in the comments. If you're rewatching the show, let us know that we are wrong and that we can general strike it, because we want to general strike it.
And tweet about it to all your friends.
All your friends.
And enemies. Because if you disagree with us, you're somebody who has a lot of worthwhile enemies.
And don't forget, if you disagree with us,
we coming for you, nigga.
Gotta remember that.
You can't.
I can't.
I was wondering when it was going to happen.
You think that's what's demonetizing the shows?
Maybe we could run that experiment, right?
I think it's because we said the chosen people word. That was demonetizing shows. You can't say the chosen people word.
Well, I think
you can't say Swiss.
You can't say Haitian. I think perhaps using that word in the first 5 minutes of a show could be something that gets you demonetized.
I think chosen people and the plague are the two things you can't say. So from now on, when we say chosen people, we'll say European Haitians.
European Haitians who are Polish.
Oh my God. You're going to have to post like the official YouTube. These are the things that you can't say or you're going to get demonetized. And then the official TIR translation.
Because the N word, me and Pascal have had episodes with like Teray. I think there's an episode where it's like me, Pascal, Teray, and Cedric Johnson. It's just like no demonetization. But when we had the shows about the rapper that is unlikable and the basketball player no one likes, I don't even want to say their name, that talk about European Haitians in a negative light.
In a negative light.
Demonetized.
Like people tuning in late are going to have no idea.
But that's what I believe. I believe because we said that word, automatically you just got demonetized. The 7 dirty words of YouTube, definitely European Haitians is pretty high right now. It's hot.
Okay, but here's the thing, right? I wonder if the algorithm, the AI, is sensitive enough so that using I'll say the last word in the soundboard clip that Jason likes to play, if the faces on screen are white, demonetized.
Oh, you think that's what it is?
They might be smart like that. Yeah.
Mm,
Oh.
that makes
Oh,
sense.
so they
That
think it's
fits with their
okay when
bag.
it's a bunch of
Yeah, because imagine how many hip hop channels you'd be demonetizing, right? For no reason. But if it's, if it's just the top half of the screen and there's the approximate N bombs per second that you, Pascal, and Touré might drop, then I think there might actually be very good reasons to demonetize it.
Jason believes in equality too much.
equality. I think I have to. I forgot to say this. I was on Movie Night Extravaganza recently. We talked about one of the worst N-word movies of all time, Bullworth.
Mm.
I was angry.
Well, since we're plugging, can I say I was recently interviewed by the one and only Sean King. I was going to say Kingston. Varn. I was interviewed by Varn recently.
What? Shout out, MT. Did you show your face in a luchador mask?
No, I did not. And he did not ask that of me either. Gotta love him.
Do. What were you
Little
talking about?
butterbean.
Were you talking about being a European Haitian and
Oh,
controlling
no.
all the world's money?
You can actually have a conversation without talking about being a European Asian. I mean, it's amazing that that can happen these days.
Well, when is that
amazing.
going to drop?
I don't know yet,
Okay.
but keep it on your radar. Look out for that. I'll let you guys know. What's on your radar, Jason? Sorry.
I like I said, I was a guest on Susie Kleeman's Fatal Dates that should be coming out next week, and I was just recently on Movie Night Extravaganza, which used to be on this channel. We were talking about Bullworth and the era that came out and why it's kind of a good movie to talk about, but it was a really horrible rewatch for me. I didn't like it when it came out, and I really hated it as a 45-year-old man.
Halle Berry's in it.
Halle Berry's in it. We also talked about Halle Berry in Swordfish.
She's frequently miscast, if you ask me, but she seems very determined to get roles she shouldn't have.
The 90s was not a good time for colored cinema.
This is true. Kuba, were you somewhere recently? Oh, sorry.
I was, there's a show on Ukraine with Stefan and myself that went up earlier this week on Sublation, and the Thursday show where we also had an excellent guest, and I think you successfully peace built some people there, MT. But the biggest thing on my radar is getting a hold of those proof copies.
I'm interested
the two Paxton
too.
books. How is there like a transatlantic book rate that we could figure out? I'm in a Commonwealth country, right? There should be some kind of royal dispensation.
Oh, and Jean Bajlan is going to war with people on Twitter, and that's funny. So just go to Jean Bajlan's Twitter and just make jokes. Don't take this shit seriously.
And while you're waiting for How Capitalism Ends, get Unlearning Marx.
Definitely. We could have done a whole show. We could have done a whole show again because I think we did like 2.5 hours when you were on last time. We could have done a whole another show again. Just talk and he does go into it a little bit in the book. I think you have about 3 or 4 pages, about a chapter or two, where you kind of revisit the main points of Unlearning Marx.
Yeah, so I kind of I've got like a 2 or 3 page summary of the thrust of Unlearning Marx. Yeah.
But especially for all the Twitter warriors and people who like to post and argue with the great rightward tendency online on Learning Marx, where you discuss how to think about and how to talk about the failures of the Soviet Union. Very valuable.
I will say this in backing up your point, Kuba. Knowing you and Jean Bajlan has been really important for helping, and actually Touré Reed as well, helping me understand history. So I appreciate you guys for that.
I mean, like,
how I should view history and how I should read history. It's extremely important.
That's the best possible use I could have put my Harvard history degree in.
It makes reading Steve's work that much easier, in my opinion, because of you guys. So.
A year ago, Steve was on This Is Revolution. So, bit of history, you guys can watch that episode as well.
And did you put that in the chat? Oh, damn. Are you going to link it in the comments for the YouTube video?
I guess.
Okay.
I will.
Okay. Well, thank you, Steve. There's links in the description to pre-order Steve's book, How Capitalism Ends. There's also links, I believe, in how to get Unlearning Marx. Yes. And you also were a co-writer in the Communist Manifesto, kind of a revisit of that as well, right? Or an editor?
Yeah, the Communist Manifesto, New Interpretations. I did a chapter for that. That was 1998, I think. Well, yes, it was, because it was came out for the 150th anniversary of the Communist Manifesto. So
that was the year that Bulworth came out, and my daughter.
Wow.
Important year.
A good year, obviously.
Yeah, I got married the first time in '98. It was a glorious year of failures.
I started college.
Oh, that's right, because I'm older than you.
98?
Oh, geez. MT, what were you doing in 1998? Quick. What were you doing?
I was
what were you doing?
Graduate. Getting close to graduate.
What do you graduate because you needed the credits?
Yes.
That's why we can't get ahead as a people. Thank you, guys.
Nah.